Welcome to the show, The Debate. I'm your host, Sana Maqbool. Once again with you on B2B World, talking about the news from all over the world, also in the country. At The Debate, we look at all the angles, giving you the informed picture that you deserve, trying to give you all the kind of perspectives that we possibly can on different issues so that you are able to get a complete report on different issues and form your own opinions. In today's show, we will be talking about two important topics. First, of course, the Iran nuclear talks, the resumption which is expected on the 29th of this month after a 5-month gap. What remains to be seen, of course, is whether or not this round of talks is going to be successful, since the previous ones have not reached any sort of ground as of yet. Of course, whether or not these round of talks that are going to start on the 29th of November will result in something tangible is a question mark, considering the fact that both sides are putting pressure on each other, talking about how the other side needs to do something first or is more responsible regarding whether or not the success of these talks is achieved. What, of course, we need to understand here is that at the end of the day, it's important for peace in the region. But what sort of a deal is going to be achieved with Iran? What is going to be the limit of the Western world powers as to when they will drop the negotiating act and go ahead with some sort of a reaction, considering they will continue to warn Iran of its advancement in uranium enrichment, with Israel also threatening to attack, and Joe Biden talking about how only measures that were taken by Donald Trump are going to be negotiated, not other measures or other sanctions concerning human rights. So, of course, all of these questions need to be addressed to actually analyze and understand whether this is a step forward or not. We will also be taking a look at the Pentagon report and the, of course, situation at the line of actual control between India and China, something which since June earlier this year has resulted in large-scale deployments on both sides of the border. We have, of course, seen tensions rise last year in June as well, where we saw the deaths of 20 Indian soldiers, the first since 1975. Of course, these skirmishes continue to exist, and the deployments are still there, and any form of talks moving towards reconciliation seem to have very limited progress. On top of that, we also have the U.S. side claiming the fact that China continues to put incremental and tactical actions in place to put pressure on India regarding its claims on the territory at the line of actual control. And then we have the Chinese side claiming the fact that the U.S. needs to mind its own business and not interfere with the relationship of China and India. So we'll look at this progress and evolving situation on the line of actual control in line with all of these angles. What we're going to do now is, of course, introduce our two analysts in the show who continue to be a part of the debate. Mr. Farooq Fatafi and Raja Faisal are with us. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, we've also been joined, of course, by very esteemed guests online who will be sharing their opinion and their views regarding this issue. We've been joined, Abduljan Alagos. Please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. She is the Director of Foreign Policy Program at the Center for Iranian Studies at Ankara. We've also been joined by Hussein Askari, Southwest Asia Coordinator at the Schiller Institute. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Before we continue our discussion on this topic, let's take a look at the small report reported by our desk and then continue from there.
Iran has announced that it will begin talks with world leaders to find a way to salvage the Joint Comprehensive Plan for Action. The Trump administration unilaterally pulled the United States out of the 2015 nuclear deal and imposed brutal sanctions on Iran. After the imposition of sanctions, Tehran began to breach various limits on uranium enrichment set by the nuclear deal. Talks between Iran and world powers aimed at salvaging the deal, which started in April, are now slated to resume at the end of November. Tensions have arisen between Tehran and Washington amid stalled talks on reviving Iran's 2015 nuclear deal with world powers, under which Tehran curtailed its uranium enrichment program in exchange for a lifting of global sanctions. Iran's top security official Ali Shamkhani warned that the talks would fail unless President Biden could guarantee Washington would not renege on the nuclear agreement in the future.
Right, so of course an overview of what has been going on regarding the Iran nuclear talks, and since of course 2018 there has been a huge question mark on these talks and whether or not any success is possible. As you saw in the report as well, the Iranian side is also skeptical about the commitment that is being extended from the US side, while the US and Western world powers continue to be suspicious and also concerned regarding Iran's advancement in uranium enrichment, with direct threats also coming in place with countries like Israel. Mr. Faisal, let's start with you in the program. Considering the fact that all of this has been going on for some time now, there has been many pauses and delays in the Iranian nuclear talks, a lot of trust deficit on all of the sides. Both sides continue to stand on their ground on a lot of the issues. How much of a progress are you hopeful for on the 29th of November?
Sana, I am hopeful that this time around the talks would be successful in Vienna end of this month. And the reason why, a disgruntled Iran was there and it wasn't coming to the table because of Donald Trump, the previous president of U.S. Because what we saw last time, the U.S. administration at that time, especially President Trump, he wanted Iranian ballistic missile program to be shut down, and that's why Trump was forcing Iran to do it. Iran did not accept that, and that's why Americans, they actually came out of that agreement, and Iran was disgruntled. But right now, we saw that region already had problems with Iran's uranium enrichment, but there is another threat for Iran, that we are seeing the continuous flights of the fighter jets of Americans as well as Israelis. They are hovering on the top of Iran, and this itself is a deterrence for Iran. So Iran is being deterred. At the same time, Americans, they want to continue, especially talking about Biden administration, they want to give a continuation to whatever was halted by the previous administration, especially the agreement which was done in the Obama administration. So I am hopeful that this time around, Iran really desperately wants it, and the Western countries, they want it as well, because there is a continuous threat of a crisis, of a war in the region, and that can be avoided only through these talks.
Right, we also have net pricing that there is a relatively small number of issues that are remaining outstanding, and they can be resolved in a short span of time. Ms. Bildan, considering the fact that this is the kind of statement that's coming out, do you think that this portrays the correct picture of what the scenario really is? Because maybe the issues are few in number, but are they really small in the intensity or the scale?
Actually, the past experiences determine the future of the nuclear negotiations, and at the time we need to compare the circumstances with 2015. At those times, there was a kind of hope on the Iranian side to have some tangible benefit from the JCPOA, but the experiences show that even before the U.S. withdrawal, the JCPOA didn't give that much benefit to Iran, particularly on the economy, because the foreign direct investment didn't come Iran as it was desired, and Iran, especially in the aftermath of the withdrawal, totally lost its advantage under JCPOA. So, the administration is considering all these side effects of JCPOA period, and we need to understand that the foreign policy perception in Reisi administration is totally different from Rouhani era. Reisi is open to negotiations, and we can name this period as a principles negotiation era, maybe, because the principles that Supreme Leader gave to this nation, Iranian nation, determines the framework of the negotiation process. What is it? On his speech in the inauguration on August 3, he totally explained the framework of the negotiation. There has to be a guarantee for Iran that U.S. will not have any withdrawal, and there won't be any follow-up agreement that demands from Iran to limit its missile program and its military involvement in the exit of
Yes, thank you. No, considering the fact that the Iranian side has also put up a front of demanding what they think that their country deserves, or how sanctions need to be lifted, how their involvement in not really following the deal that was negotiated earlier on is correct, since it's the U.S. who backed out in the first place, and of course then considering the U.S. side and Western world putting a lot of pressure and sanctions on Iran, and the fact that they keep on pointing towards the fact that this window of opportunity will not be open forever, and that Iran will have to face further consequences. What sort of threat can the U.S. or the Western world be really pointing at now, considering the fact that so many sanctions have already put in place? Is there a possibility of a military threat, Mr. Hussain?
Yes, thank you, Sana. I actually want to raise 3 points that are connected to each other to answer that question. First of all, is nuclear technology is the right of every nation to acquire. It's not somebody's property. And it's the right of Iran and Pakistan and every nation in Africa and around the world to acquire modern technology. And the West has been adamant on preventing that from happening. That's why they are not building nuclear power plants. They don't have nuclear technology transfer to any developing nation. The other thing is that there has been no threat of an Iranian nuclear bomb at all. All the opposition by the United States and Israel especially has been not because they are afraid Iran will develop a nuclear bomb, but the aim is to regime change. They want to change the regime in Iran. That's it. It has nothing to do with nuclear weapons. The JCPOA was the best guarantee for the whole world that Iran does not produce or develop nuclear weapons. It took many, many years to get that. The world has its ears and eyes inside Iran's nuclear program, so there is no fear. The U.S. intelligence agencies, many years, in 2007, 2010, 2012, 2019, they said there is no evidence that Iran is capable of producing a weapon. That's from the U.S. intelligence agencies. In 2007, the U.S. intelligence estimate said that Iran has abandoned its program of nuclear weapons. So there is no evidence at all that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. The United States knows that, Israel knows that. The aim is to change the regime in Iran. The third point is that the Iranians don't need to go back and negotiate once again. The Iranians can only demand that JCPOA is reinstated, the sanctions are lifted. The world has changed since the JCPOA was signed in 2015. Iran does not need to go to the West. The West has to go to Iran now because many things have changed. There's a new constellation of powers in the world, strategic and economic, which is based on China, Russia, Pakistan, Iran cooperation, especially after what happened in Afghanistan. There is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization emerging as a completely new power. The Belt and Road Initiative has emerged as a new world economic power, economic system, and that's why the Iranians, the previous government was not very open to China and Russia and was trying to play East against West. The new government in Iran is completely for going East, working with China and Russia on the Belt and Road Initiative, on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and that's why there will be no concessions from Iran towards the West. Now what the United States can play, they can play the pirates of the Caribbean. They are playing that in the Indian and Pacific Ocean against China. They are playing pirates of the Caribbean against Russia in the Black Sea. And now they are playing the pirates of the Caribbean with Iran in the Gulf of Oman. This is all they can do. That's very, very dangerous. But any trigger. Remember that Iran and Russia and China have military and naval exercises and agreements. So any attack on Iran will be considered as an attack on Russia and China. And that's something nobody wants to get to. And therefore, to resolve in the coming negotiations, what the United States and Europe should do is to go back to the JCPOA, no changes, don't demand change in the Iranian missile program, no discussion about Yemen, no discussion about Hezbollah. All these things should be removed from the table because the JCPOA was the best guarantee that Iran never is able to develop nuclear weapons. That's the point.
Right. Considering the fact that you said that perhaps there is no evidence of what the Western world may be claiming in terms of acquiring a nuclear capability, in terms of having
the U.S. intelligence agencies say there is no evidence.
Right. perhaps there is no evidence, but when has that really stopped the U.S. or Sana from doing something as to actually going forward and challenging the sovereignty of a nation, or playing around with the fact that this is something that is causing a threat to peace in the region or the world, or that it is something that needs to be taken care of? One may say that they might have learned their lesson, but is this really a deterrence for the Western world before they think twice about going through Iran, Farooq?
Right. You have actually changed the question, but I'm going to try to actually connect all the dots. While we were talking about JCPOA or the resumption, it is very important to remind our viewers what was good in that deal. There are basically 5 points, right? Where 4 were related to Iran actually providing concession. Number 1, stockpiles from 10,000 kilograms of stockpile to 300 kilograms. That is insufficient for making a nuclear bomb. The second thing, very important, was enrichment. Curtailment of somewhere around 90% of its capacity to enrich. It would have brought the total capacity to 3-point-something percent of the overall process, bringing down the capacity to make nukes. The third one was centrifuges, and there was a dramatic reduction that was promised under this agreement in the centrifuges that actually helps in the enrichment process. Finally, inspection, and inspections were allowed. There was one caveat, and the caveat was that Iran could delay certain places to be inspected for 24 days. So that actually brought the overall potential of Iran acquiring a nuclear bomb in a way that Iran would have been actually moved 1 year away from that capacity, right? And finally, this agreement was going to hold for 15 years. Now let us talk about what was Iran getting in exchange. Iran was getting a reprieve from all international sanctions. That essentially means that Iran had the capacity to trade. Now the arguments that were given by the spoilers were 3. Number 1, 1 year. That if it were to fall out of a JCPOA, within 1 year it could have acquired nukes. It hasn't, we know that. The second aspect was 15 years is too small a timeline for this kind of agreement. The third one was that when you lift the sanctions, Iran could always enrich itself financially and then go for the nuclear capacity. But with due respect, let me tell you, when you talk about the West and when you talk about Iran, things have shifted. Thanks to Donald Trump also. The biggest bottleneck at this moment from all sides may be P5+1 or may it be Iran, is essentially lack of trust. If once you have withdrawn from it, you can do it again. So Iran is skeptical, but amazingly at this moment there are 2 aspects which convince Iran to actually stick to it. One, the regime change or the government change. Earlier it was President Rouhani who was a moderate, not a reformist, but now you have the actual custodians of state in power. So they can deliver if they make a promise. Inflation and economic sanctions have really bothered our Iranian brothers a lot, and one hopes that their pain actually is reduced. Regarding the West, West has 2 incentives, and one, withdrawal of weakening of opposition. Israel was very aggressive regarding this thing. Netanyahu was opposing it. Now Netanyahu is out of the picture. The new government might be a right-wing government in Israel, but it is amenable to some kind of agreements or arrangement. When we talk about the other part of the equation, that is the Arab world and primarily OPEC, I think OPEC is the reason why I see the possibility of this agreement happening, because the oil prices in OPEC's control are going to go up, and it is going to bother every democracy. Right. So I am very hopeful that in coming days there is going to be an agreement.
Right. Bilgan, I would like to take your comments on this as well, considering the fact that, of course, we have a new regime in Iran. Does that change the overall narrative that we're expecting from the Iranian side? Does that bring about any change in the possibility of success in the nuclear talks?
I'm actually looking forward to see some sort of change. There's going to be some harsher position on the Iranian side, because here we need to understand who's very much dependent on the nuclear negotiation process. At this point, as the last speaker mentioned, the increasing oil prices give some benefit to Iran, especially despite the sanctions. Iran and China still have some relationship. Iran can export oil to China, and this creates some economical refreshment for the Reis administration. So the economy is the vital reason for Iran to be in the negotiation process, and at this point Iran doesn't have any trust against the United States, because if there is no guarantee, why would Iran enter this kind of process? So there is going to be a negotiation process, but I'm not that much hopeful about the result. Also, now Iranian nuclear program is part of a domestic discussion in the United States. There has been an election in the United States, and the Republican pressure on Democrats is increasing day by day, and there is going to be a midterm election in the United States on November 2022. So it's not easy for United States to give that much guarantee to Iran.
Right.
So to me, there is going to be a process, but not a short process. It's a long way story.
Right. Okay. Mr. Hussain, considering the fact that Joe Biden has said that he will not be negotiating on all of the sanctions and just the ones that Donald Trump took, the measures that he took, and the Iranian side is, of course, asking for removal of all sanctions. If we really just boil it down to how the negotiations are actually going to come forward and be put on the table, what sort of areas do you think are relatively easy to be discussed than the other ones? How are they going to go ahead with these areas? Can the U.S. reconsider the fact that maybe perhaps going back to all of the lifting of all of the sanctions, or not?
Yeah, I think there is the United States should show some sort of a sign of goodwill, because remember, the ones who withdrew from the agreement is not Iran. It was President Trump and the United States who withdrew from the agreement. So, and then they imposed further sanctions on Iran. The problem is that Europe and the rest of the world followed, did not challenge these actions by the U.S. Administration. Therefore, the Iranian leadership is saying, what is the point of negotiating with the United States and the West if they're not going to change their mind the whole time? Are there any grown-ups in the room to talk to? And that's one problem. The other problem is that the Trump administration left a lot of luggage to the Biden administration, which the Biden administration have not thrown away. For example, that they wanted to add to the discussion the question of Iran's missile program. They wanted to add to the discussion Iran's role in all the situation in other countries, in Syria, and Lebanon, and Yemen, and all of those. They want to add that to the negotiations of the nuclear program. And the Iranians say, look, these have nothing to do with the nuclear program. We can discuss these things, but you cannot add them to. So they are suspecting that the United States is not serious to go back to the JCPOA or any kind of negotiations because of that. Therefore, I think the best thing to do is that there should be some easing of some of the sanctions by the United States and Europe, like a gesture of goodwill, in order to come one step closer to the Iranians and see if the Iranians can reciprocate with opening up more of their discussion, what they want to discuss. But as I said before, I mean, the matter is very simple. The JCPOA was the best deal the West could get to make sure that Iran does not acquire nuclear weapons. That is a very simple matter. But the problem is that there are other issues here. As I said, they want to change the Iranian regime, and they have not changed their mind about that. Therefore, the Iranians are very skeptical, and they don't want to move further. And as the other speakers said, that there is an economic aspect, there is the oil crisis. China can buy oil from Iran. Many other countries are going to join that. They will use their own currencies instead of the dollar.
Right, thank you. Point taken. Considering now the fact that, of course, the U.S. side's commitment is also something that is a concern of Iran. Also, adding to the worries, the fact that, of course, we've had a recent state election that has been won by the Trump's Republican Party, and that's putting question mark on the entire commitment of the U.S. side as well, whether or not they're going to be able to stand by these commitments, considering their history says otherwise. Faisal, your last comments on the entire issue, and of course keeping in mind this factor as well, that is the U.S. Or can the U.S. really be trusted for it giving its commitment to the deal?
Sana, we can trust U.S. right now because it desperately needs these talks to be successful. But as I was listening to Brother Hussain, while he was talking, he highlighted a very important point when he said that they are, like Iran is in a military bloc with China and Russia. And China and Russia being two countries of the six that would be involved in Vienna end of this month in the talks, it would be very interesting to see that to what extent Iran can accept the say of Chinese and the Russians, and if Russia and China successfully tell Iran to accept it or not. What role they will be playing, that would be interesting to see.
Right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Special thanks to Ms. Bilgahan Alagos for joining us, and Hussain Askari for being with us on the show and talking to us about this very important issue. We'll be moving on to the next topic in the show now, which is, of course, the Pentagon report and the overall relations between India and China on the line of actual control, the standoff that has been going on for a while, and, of course, the role that the U.S. can be playing in this regard as well. Farooq, I'll start with you, considering the fact that China and India have been witnessing this standoff for a while now. We've had skirmishes last year, which has resulted in the deaths of 20 Indian soldiers as well. How far do you think that this standoff can just exist? Will this be another border issue that is going to last forever, or does it have possibilities of escalation?
Right, Sana, thank you very much. I think that we have the habit of reading too much into smaller conflicts. I understand that at this moment world order is in transition and everybody actually wants to believe whatever they want to believe. But I think that this is the limit of the escalation between the two countries. Why do I say this? We keep on thinking that somehow there's going to be a new world order where you are going to have a Cold War, and China and the US will fight, and this one country is going to be the proxy, that is India. I don't think that is going to happen. There are two reasons. One, beyond this escalation level, if you go, you actually enter a proper war. And I remember during the Cold War days, we used to hear about mutually assured destruction. Now I'm going to use another term, that is, assured collective destruction. Both these countries have enough nuclear stockpile that if they start, they are not going to stop that easily, and they can destroy not only each other, but this can generate, take us to a new world war, and the devastating one. Remember that when you talk about end state, there are only two end states here. One is possibility of total annihilation of all of us. The second end state is that all these countries work together. So unfortunately, when you look at the whole thing, you realize that it is end of imagination. Why? There have been four borders historically. One is called Johnson border or boundary. It was declared by the British. Then there was another that was McCartney. That also came later. And finally, China has Tibetan border, traditional Tibetan border claims that actually includes Galwan and all those areas. And the fourth one is a line of actual control, which is neither a line nor it controls anything. But I believe that historically this region has been a buffer zone, and buffer zone it was, and it would have continued to be a grazing ground for cattle had it not been for Narendra Modi's government, which unilaterally in 2019, 822 days ago, scuttled its arrangement with Jammu and Kashmir and bifurcated it, absorbed Ladakh as its union territory, and since then China has been uncomfortable. I think that these are the areas back in 40s, Nehru used to say that this is basically a cattle ground, it is not habitable. I think eventually we'll have to go back to buffer zones idea, and it will have to de-escalate. But I don't think that it is going to go beyond this.
Right. We've also been joined by Azhar Kazmi, a senior journalist and analyst on Skype with us. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Azhar. Farooq earlier was talking about how this escalation is all that there is to the issue at the line of actual control, and any expectation of a possible escalation is not there. If that is so, how does this standoff play about in the factor of regional peace and other relations with other countries, especially, of course, with regards to U.S. relations with India?
Thank you so much. When we talk about escalation, to be honest, it's not. My colleague of mine was talking about mutual assured destruction. If in the region we have this sort of situation, to be honest, it does not favor anyone. It's not in favor of Pakistan. It is not in favor of India or China. That's why we see when we look at Europe, there's no hostility between European neighbors. They have disputes as well. There's almost 20 plus territorial disputes within Europe, but they never bring things to this point where they have so much tensions between the nations. So we need to understand this as well. If we have this sort of situation in either between India or Pakistan or India or China, sometimes there is a feeling that if there is the relationship between India and China is not good, it benefits Pakistan somehow, but I don't think it does, to be honest. Obviously, we have a good relationship with China, and China has stood by us on many occasions. But the thing is that if we look at the regions, they develop. All the region develop together. We cannot live in sort of what you call in a world where we do development in Pakistan or in China. We have a CPAC, very successful project, but we exclude Afghanistan or India from it. So for regions' prosperity, for regions' benefit, I think we need a situation where all of us, all the countries, all the regional countries would have to behave maturely and would have to look what you call secure the interest of region. Until and unless we do that, I don't see any hope for the region, to be honest.
Right. Faisal, we've earlier seen today as well in an address, the Prime Minister Modi has talked about military enhancement in India. And we've also seen steps by the Modi's regime which point a lot towards unilateral steps, considering, of course, the examples that Farooq also earlier talked about. Can such unilateral actions be taken by Modi's regime with regards to China, the line of actual control? Is that even a possibility for India to take? Do you think that is something that we can expect from the Modi's regime, or will they not want to tackle that issue with China like that?
Sana, right now India is facing a two-front dilemma. They have never faced the extent of it in past, but right now they are facing. And since 2 years, first of all, they tried to penetrate in Pakistan. They think that they have conducted a sort of surgical strike in Pakistan in Balakot, and then later on. Whatever Pakistan did, the whole world knows about it. We don't need to repeat it. Then later on, Galwan happens. But I want to take you why it all happened. America wanted India to be the front line of the Americans against China in US-China trade war. And if we look at America, America has already engaged China in the East China Sea, Taiwan, and obviously they have presence in South Korea, and they have presence in Japan in terms of the active troops as well. But if we look at the South China Sea, they wanted someone and they looked for another billionaire in terms of population, and that was the Indians, and they wanted to use India on that front. And that's when the real trouble for India started. And the LAC, which we say LAC, the build-up we saw from the Chinese, that was owing to the fact that India unilaterally started making decisions related to Ladakh, related to Jammu and Kashmir. So China did not like it, and then what happened? China started building up, and then Galwan happens. Now we have a situation since Galwan. What happened? 13 times both of the armies they met to resolve the issues, but they failed all of the 13 times. And if we look at the Indian side, what India prepared itself for, if we look at the statements of Lieutenant General Manoj Pandey, who happens to be the Eastern Commander, and he himself said it, that 3 of the air bases of the Chinese along the LOC, they are completed, and Chinese are working on another one. And all of these 3 air bases, they are fully equipped. So that means China is all set and ready to wage a war anytime, whenever they want. But if we look at the Indians have been working on 5 theater commands. First, we came to know that last year they decided that they will be going towards the 5 theater commands to counter the two-front threat. But we kept on seeing that they continuously failed. Earlier this year, they tried to do it, still failed. The basic reason behind it is that they have somebody called CDS Bipin Rawat. He is the key person who happens to be, of a mindset of the RSS, and he wants to run the show when it comes to India's military capacity. And if you look at the previous Air Chief, Indian Air Force Chief, Bhaduria, he did not accept his orders, and he was of the view that if they want to initiate the theater commands, then the aerial theater commands should be in his hand. But they have the internal rift going on, and the things are not getting sorted out. Right. Even 2 days before, they had a meeting, a high-level meeting of the military personnel, but it did not work out. Still, they are saying that next year in April, they will initiate the theater commands, which is, we can't see that happening. So India is not prepared, China is prepared. So right now, if we see at the equation, I think, India is going to make a huge mistake if it even tries to do anything on LSC or LOC.
Right, considering all this and the fact that Modi's regime is in power, can we see any possible future of this coming down to the negotiating table with India and China sitting down and talking and resolving these issues, considering, of course, that India or the Modi's regime has not been a fan of the negotiating table? Farooq?
Right. I would have answered or countered your question by saying that I'm a big believer in Chinese and Indian wisdom. But all of a sudden, I'm not that big a fan, or I'm not too sure about Indian side. I say it because someone who has been reading Nehru's all books cover to cover, even Hindutva books as well, the current dispensation in India is, a very comical and strange kind of a mix. And yesterday I told you about their escalatory nature, that they always have to do something bigger to actually involve the people. So they could have ended up somewhere that could have created a lot of problems. But I tell you, underneath all this problem, I think there must be some wisdom. And I actually appeal to that when you talk to you, when I talk to you. And I talk about 2 problems that are there. One, regarding the situation at this moment, it is also because of the way nation states and international law has emerged. There is hardly any law to regulate, buffer zones between two nation states. They are called ungoverned spaces, and that becomes a problem in the age of terrorism. Perhaps someday you'll have to update the law as well. But on the other side, when you talk about India's emergence or India's desire to do something, the current, government of Narendra Modi can be compared with one character from literature, and I'm talking about Don Quixote, who keeps on imagining things where things are not. To be honest, war is a serious matter. Shouldn't be used to win elections. And at this moment, when you talk about the world order, let me extend an invitation to everybody who's listening. We are living in the 21st century, and its second decade is gone. This is the third one that has started. Should we not be better than the people who fought the two world wars? Shouldn't we be talking about collective security? At this moment, the entire world was defeated by one virus. For a year, one whole year, the entire world was shut down. Shouldn't we be working together? Is it any cost to pay, if you talk about fight, to just stay in power? At this moment, it is important that we all agree that collective security is bigger than whatever you want to actually invent in the name of war.
Right, we should be doing that, but will we and can we actually expect countries like India to do that is a big question mark. We are short on time, so I would just like to ask one last question from you regarding the talk about US bases, the possibility of them springing up in India to contain China. We've known that US has always tried to influence its power to ensuring that China's power is curtailed in the region, but is there an actual possibility of bases being formed within India?
Well, US would love to have bases there, to be honest, but we've seen recently there was some sort of agreement between US, Australia and United Kingdom, and we saw the reaction from Chinese. Chinese were very blunt about it. They made direct threats, you could say direct threats to Australia. They said UK and US would not be, they are not the ones who are in the region. You are the one who are in the region. If we do something, your soldiers will die. These are the exact words of Chinese foreign ministry. So I think India knows this. India is well aware of the fact. India is well aware of the fact of Chinese military might. So they would not. I think personally, I think they would not venture into this sort of partnership with America. They would probably, get some sort of military aid or some sort of military cooperation from US, but they would not offer military bases to America at this time and point, I think.
Right, and to what extent do you think that the US and India can collaborate in order to contain China or to actually be able to respond to the threat of China, as they call it, considering that China has, like you said, blatantly expressed its views of the US minding its own business, but of course the Indian-US alliance remains.
Yes, they are already cooperating with each other. To be honest, they signed an intelligence sharing agreement. India is now using American satellites and they're using American drones. So they are cooperating. But the thing is that the problem with India is they don't have the luxury of United States, which is 5, 6, 10,000 miles away. They are next door to Chinese. If they do anything which China perceive as a aggressive move, they know that the Chinese would retaliate. So that's the thing. They are already cooperating with Americans, but they are in some sort of dilemma. There's a limit they can go to. Beyond that limit, I think India would not venture into.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Adar Kazmi, for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is all we have time for regarding the discussion. Of course, whatever happens at the line of actual control and in the world in different disputes, whatever we aim for is peace, whether it is Iran or whether it's India and China, and of course Pakistan or Afghanistan. What we want is to be able to achieve peace in the region, both for ourselves and the world, and that is only possible through the negotiating table. We've seen it many times before that there is no military solution to a conflict. Thank you very much for joining us and being with us. Watch us again tomorrow at 9 p.m. That's all we have for now. Take care.
Thank you.